Good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly sorry Mr. Armstrong couldn't be with us today. He came back from California from his father's funeral with a very bad case of tonsillitis. I guess that's what it was. He had quite a big problem with his throat. Went to see the doctor, and the doctor's given him some medication and sent him home to rest. And so he is obeying the doctor today and being very careful. And I think if he were here today, he probably could be here, but he would have to talk to people if he were here, and talking very much. Very bad for what ails him at the present time. When he got back from California, he could not even croak. I mean, he could not get, when you get laryngitis, a lot of times you get a little bit out of your vocal cords, but it's very, very low key and sore, and it's sore and hurts. But in his case, it even hurt him to whisper, and that's all he could do. The vocal cords would not vibrate. So, but he is a lot better. I talked with him briefly this morning, and he said he would pass up services today, and I'm sure one of his main reasons is to avoid having to talk to all you folks today. But it has nothing to do with the fact he doesn't like you. It's just that we're such a gabby bunch of folks that it would put quite a bit of stress on him, I think, to be here today. The work started off 1986 very well. Due to some statistical vagaries, we only started out with about an 8% increase in money, but this last week kicked it up to over 20%. And I really expect, based upon what the statistical patterns, that it's going to improve further the next 2 weeks. We should see ourselves by mid-February, I think, in a pretty strong position as far as our income is concerned relative to last year. Very pleased with that. That, by the way, does not reflect, as far as I can tell, any special movement of funds from the Worldwide Church of God. There has been nothing discernible in that regard at all, if any of you had that question in the back of your mind. It is not a factor. Mr. Armstrong has written a letter. Did that get in the mail yesterday? About half of it got in the mail yesterday. The other half will go in, I guess, on Monday. Basically, talking about the death of his father and his experiences and what his feelings were at that time and what his feelings are for the future. So I won't preempt him in that regard today. I'll let you get his letter. It should be arriving in all of your homes. Some of you will get it early in the weeks, but almost all of you will have it certainly before Friday. You here, I would be quite certain would. The people in the field will have that letter in hand, I'm sure, before they even get this tape. And it was a very moving letter in many ways. I think you'll find it of some interest. And, of course, Mr. Armstrong's vision and concern for the future of the work is of concern to all of us. Other thing I did notice, by the way, statistically, the number of people this year giving Holy Day offerings, which is one of the measures of our membership. That is, of our head of family membership. That is, those people who actually write out checks. Each one of them may represent more than one person. That number was up 36% last year to 1,922 people, and that was not far off from our festival attendance in all of North America this last year. I don't know if we ever really got added up, all the registrations from all the festival sites this year. But if that pattern follows again this year, we should have something like 2,500 people at the feast in the United States and Canada in this coming year. That's a very encouraging thing, and we'd appreciate your prayers regarding our festival planning, because we still have not heard back from the new management. The Gulf Shores Management Company changed this last year. As I think many of you know, it was owned by the state of Alabama, but they contract out to a management company who actually take care of the place, and we still have. The new management company took over on the 21st. That was 4 days ago, and as of this point in time, we have still not heard from them regarding our plans for the coming year. So we are going to be looking at some other places a little further down the coast, perhaps as far as Panama Beach. Panama Beach? No. Yes. Panama City. Yeah, Panama City. There is a possibility there, and we may even want to consider it anyway, because it has an auditorium that will seat 1,200. Which is a lot better than we had at Gulf Shores with 850. And I don't know, what to expect this coming year, but as much as you all liked it, I trust everybody's going to be back there again. So, and who knows who in addition will show up. So we would appreciate your thoughts and concern, your prayers regarding 1986 festival planning. It is something that is of some concern to us. I imagine many of you this week have noticed a lot of the news items regarding Voyager 2 and its journey past Uranus and the remarkable photographs that thing is sending back. I was so shocked. I'd somehow slipped my mind that they said that satellite, I guess it's not a satellite really, it's a space probe, was launched in 1977. Can you imagine your car working that long without something going wrong with it and needing repair? Or that machine has been hurtling through the cold of space at something approaching 20,000 miles an hour for 9 years, and has performed every task they've given it, keeps on taking pictures, keeps on sending it back, has just finished Uranus and is now on its way to Neptune. It's got yet another job to fulfill. It's staggering when you really contemplate what's involved with that and what's involved with a journey. It's going along at a pretty good clip, but at that speed it would take it 135,000 years to reach the nearest star in our own galaxy. And it's shocking to think in those terms. 20,000 miles an hour. It took it 9 years to get to Uranus. It will take it 135,000 years to reach the nearest star. It probably will never reach as far as any of the nearby galaxies because they are retreating from us at a higher rate of speed than Voyager itself is traveling. Hard to realize the incredible speeds and distances that are out there. How long do you suppose it would take for that space probe to get to the place where God is? How long? Where is that place? Is it inside the universe or is it outside of the universe? If it's inside the universe, is it, say, just outside our own galaxy, perhaps, as opposed to being over in another galaxy? Or maybe if it's inside our galaxy, maybe he sits just outside of our solar system and somewhere in that position. Where is God? Or is God everywhere? That probably occurred to you as I said, well, how long would it take to get to God? Well, God's everywhere. What do you mean? How long would it take to get to God? Now, there's a problem with this God is everywhere concept if you think about it for a moment, because we know that Jesus is God. We know that he told his disciples that he was going to go to the Father. Now, when you go, don't you leave the place that you are and move to another place? So that when Jesus said to the disciples, I go, that means he is not going to be here. He is going to be where he goes to. And he said, if I go, I will come again. Now, when someone comes, prior to their arrival, they are not here. They are somewhere else. Are they not? So consequently, there is a little bit of a problem with this idea that, well, God is everywhere, and that God can come, and that God can go. If you think about it, there is a mild contradiction in human terms, in terms of human logic, when we think in terms of God coming, and God going, and God being everywhere, and God being here at this time, and yet he is going to come. Is it confusing to you? Oh, well, it might be, because after all, we are human beings, and we think in human terms. Now, in saying that God is everywhere, I think that there is a risk involved, and I think many people come to this kind of a conclusion. And say that God is everywhere, they create a kind of a mystical, diaphanous ghost that is everywhere, but is nowhere. That God, if he is everywhere, can he then at some point in time be somewhere? Can he have a specific locus? Can he have a place where he is if he's everywhere? Well, the answer is really no, he cannot if he is everywhere. And I really think that a lot of people, in the process of saying, well, God is everywhere, they create a diffuse God who has no focal point of power, no place where he is. Now, there is a sense in which it is true to say that God is in this plant. I can say, well, God is even in this plant. God is in the rocks. God is in the wood that is taken from the tree. God is in the air. There is a sense in which I can say all of these things, but if God is in a tree, then there would be nothing particularly wrong with my bowing down before this tree and worshiping, would there? And yet it would be foolish for me to do so. For truth to tell, although there is a sense in which I can say, well, God is in the tree, God is not in that tree. That tree is not the place where God is. And we always think in terms of God being in a place. Where is that place? Now, I want you to turn back with me to the book of Exodus, because I don't know of anywhere to go to understand this other than the Bible. I could philosophize about it for time without end. I could turn to a lot of science fiction writers who might speculate at great length about how one can be several places at the same time and yet be primarily in one place. But I think I'd rather go to the Bible and come to understand exactly what's involved in all of this. In the 19th chapter of Exodus, in verse 7, Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all the words which the Lord had commanded him. And the people answered and said together, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. Now, they have come to Mount Sinai. They are camped there. There are little tents all over the place made out of animal skins and cloths that are woven by different people. There are goats bleating and children crying and all the goings-on. Women are washing clothes. People are preparing food, little smoke going up from a fire here and there. All these people are gathered around in the foothills, the low areas around Mount Sinai. Moses has gone up to Mount Sinai, and Moses has talked to God. Was God in the camp or was God in the mount? You know, there is this image presented to us that Moses goes and talks to God. Moses returns from God and talks to the people. The people say, whatever God says, we'll do it. Moses goes back and talks to God again. We are presented with this image of things. And the Lord said to Moses, Lo, I come to you in a thick cloud that the people may hear when I speak to you. He said, I'm going to come down. I'm going to be in a thick cloud because I want all of the people to hear when I speak. Now, theoretically, I suppose he could have been invisible and could have spoken, and they heard it. But it was in God's mind, in his plan, that the people should see what we might call a locus. That is the Latin word for place. And it means the place where God was and from which he was speaking, so that they would have in their minds an idea of a finite, not finite in the sense of human things, but of a God who could be located and communicated with, as opposed to a God that is sort of everywhere and nowhere and nebulous and that one cannot touch or one cannot feel or one cannot experience. Because these people were about to experience God. And it is a staggering experience as it happens. He said, I'm going to come to you in a thick cloud that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, Go to the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their clothes, and be ready against the third day. For the third day the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. So God did not live on Mount Sinai. He was not permanently there. He was elsewhere. And at a moment of time, he was going to come down upon Mount Sinai. So we don't quite have, as I say, there is a sense in which God is everywhere, that he sees all and knows all. But for us, he presents himself as being somewhere and coming to somewhere in the sight of all the people to make a manifestation of himself that the people might experience God on this occasion. He said, You shall set bounds unto the people round about. They're going to put up boundary lines and markers and places that the people were not supposed to cross. He said, Take heed to yourself that you don't go up into the mountain, that you don't touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. There shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man. It shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, they shall come to the mountain. So we've got two sets of movement. God is going to come to the mountain, and the people are going to come to the mountain. People are moving. God moves. And Moses went down from the mount to the people, and he sanctified them, and they washed their clothes, and everybody prepared. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning, there were thunders and lightnings, and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the voice of a trumpet exceeding loud, so that all the people in the camp trembled. And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God. And they stood at the nether part of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it. Now here we have a specific movement with direction. God moves, and he moves down. He is high, he moves lower. He descends upon the mountain. And the smoke thereof ascended, it went up, as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, God answered him by a voice. And the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain. And the Lord called Moses up to the top of the mountain. And Moses went up. God was not in the bottom of the mountain. God was at the top of the mountain. He was in a place. Moses went up, and the Lord said, Go down and charge the people, lest they break through unto the Lord to gaze, and many of them perish. Apparently it was about ready to happen. The priests also which come near the Lord, to have them sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. And Moses said to the Lord, The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai, for you charged us, set the boundaries, and he has done it. And anyway, God went ahead and gave him his commandment to be sure that the people were careful as what they did. Then a little bit later, In verse 18 of chapter 20, after they had been given the Ten Commandments, and God has thundered them down from the mountaintop with his own voice, and all the people heard the voice of God. All the people saw the thunderings and the lightnings and the noise of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they removed and stood far off. So they actually moved away from God. We have all these references given to us of people moving toward God, God moving down upon the mountain, the people moving away from God. The implications of it are very plain. On this occasion, God presented himself as being in a specific place, not everywhere at once. And they said to Moses, "Speak with us and we will hear. Don't let God speak with us, lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Don't be afraid. God has come to prove you." But they still stood a long way off, and Moses drew near to the thick darkness where God was. So God was in a place, a very specific place at that time. Now, the reason I'm going into all this today is not so much to deal with some abstract theology of where is God and what about is God omnipresent or is God in a place, because that in itself has its interest level. I think a little more importance, though, is the question, if you should leave the church, I use the church for want of a better term for identifying what it is that you might be doing in terms of leaving God. If you were to leave the church, or were you to try to leave God, or to leave God's way of life, or to cease and desist from being interested in God, or talking to God, or having anything to do with God, or let's suppose that you decided to flee from God, can you do that? For if God is in a place, then apparently you can be where he is not. Or can you? Because here we get down, I think, to some very interesting questions. Over the years, I have known a number of people who have kind of forgotten about God. Or at least they think they have. Or they have tried to. And they have tried to really go away from God. They have tried to go away from his way. They have tried to, abandon and leave off his service. Where is God when all that happens to these people? What do they actually get away from him? Are they actually able to make a movement away from God? Now, I want to take you to a scripture. You might even be ahead of me on this one if you're thinking ahead and trying to outline my sermon for me as I go. The book of Jonah is perhaps the most obvious case in question. The book of Jonah. My little markings are wearing thin on my edge of my Bible, so it takes me a moment longer than it would otherwise take. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise and go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me." Now, there's been a lot of speculation about what happens at this point. We are told that Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So Jonah was in God's presence, for indeed he had had a message from God. God said, "Go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it." It's been speculated that Jonah, being a prophet, not only knew about Nineveh's wickedness, that he also knew that Nineveh was the greatest possible threat to Israel in the world of that day. They were powerful, they were getting stronger, and of course history has told us in the end that Nineveh ultimately were the ones that came in and wreaked terrible havoc and destruction on the northern tribes of Israel. The Assyrians were, but they did it much later, and probably much later because of the work of Jonah. Who knows? But Jonah's thought was, if I don't go up there, God's anger will be against Nineveh, and Nineveh will be destroyed. Jonah did not want Nineveh saved because Jonah saw Nineveh as a threat. It's an interesting concept. There is no statement of this, of course, in the book of Jonah itself, but it is eminently logical that he saw them as a threat. And I can't think of any other good reason why a prophet of God who heard God's voice and knew the voice of the Lord, and the Lord says, "I want you to go up there, and you're going to go and you're going to tell them this." And instead of going in the direction of Nineveh, he went the other way. He got into a ship, and he fled from the presence of the Lord. Did he get away? Well, he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish. He paid the fare thereof, and he went down into it to go with them to Tarshish. But he's not just going, he's going from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord sent out a great wind to the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so the ship was about to be broken. So the mariners were afraid. They cried every man to his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea, to lighten it. But Jonah was gone down to the sides of the ship, and he lay. He was fast asleep. Good sleeper, I guess. The shipmaster came to him and said, "What do you mean, sleeper? Rise, call upon your God, pray like the rest of us do. We don't have any time for sleep here." And they went ahead and they tried. They cast lots to see whose fault it was that this evil came upon them. And the Lord caused the lot to fall upon Jonah. He was right there. He wasn't going to let them by random chance select some other poor unlucky soul. It fell upon the man whose fault it was. God sent the wind. God controlled the lot. God fingered Jonah right in the midst of all these people and said, "That's the man. That one, right there." Even then, these people were not willing to quite do this. Because they asked Jonah, said, "Why have you done this?" They knew already that he had fled from the presence of the Lord, I presume, because he had told them. And he said, They said, "What will we do to you?" He said, "Take me up, cast me forth to the sea, and so shall the sea be calm to you. For I know that for my sake this great tempest is upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to bring it to land, but they couldn't, because the sea wrought and was tempestuous against them. They tried. To their credit, they tried. And so finally they said, "O Lord, we beseech you, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not upon us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." They took up Jonah, and they cast him into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and offered sacrifices and made vows. Now, has God now left Jonah? Has he gotten even with him? Oh, no. Oh, my, no. He hasn't left him or forgotten him. He's not going to get away from God by being thrown into the sea. Because, you see, Jonah was willing to be thrown into the sea. He thought he might die. He thought he might be able to die in the sea. But God said no. He prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. There's no need for me to go on with the story, for you know it well. And the main part of the lesson is already taught. It is absurd. It is unprofitable. It just doesn't work to try to flee from God. When God has called you, when God is working with you, when God has put His Spirit in you, He has promised, "I will never leave you. I will never forsake you." Now, you can get up and leave Him. Guess what? He just goes right with you wherever you go. His eyes are upon you. He is concerned with you. It is His goal to bring you back. It is His goal to have you in His kingdom. He has taken hold of you, and He will not let go as long as there is anything left in you to hold on to. He will either make you His son, or He will break you. It is as simple as that. The book is very explicit in all these areas. Now, I want you to turn back with me now to Jeremiah, to a rather fascinating scripture. We go to it often because it is a scripture about false prophets. In Jeremiah 23. In Jeremiah 23, God has been at some pains to identify a set of men who are self-styled prophets. They are men who have put themselves into office, men whom God never called. He never spoke to them. They are the kind of man that God would not speak to, would have nothing Himself to do with. And yet they are men who, He says, even if they had caused my people to hear my word, they could have turned them away from their wicked ways. But He goes on to speak of these people, beginning in verse 21. "I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken to them, but they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel, if they had caused my people to hear my words, then even they would have turned them away from their evil way and their evil of their doings. Am I a God at hand, saith the Lord, and not a God far off? Can a man hide himself in secret places that I shall not see him?" Now I want you to do something for me. I want all of you in the room here now to close your eyes. Just close your eyes. No, don't go to sleep. Just close your eyes. If you see anyone nodding your head, I'll call your name. Okay? Close your eyes. Now then, are you willing at this point in time to believe that I cannot see you? Now, my eyes are open. Yours are closed. How many of you believe that I cannot see you? Then why should you believe that merely because you close your eyes to God that He can't? You can open your eyes. But don't we do that, generally speaking? That we close our eyes to God and we don't see Him anymore. And therefore, well, He must not be interested in me. Maybe He can't see me. It's a stupid thing. It's almost like some dumb animal that it closes its eyes and then it assumes that you can't see it. Now, it's invisible if it just closes it, because I can't see, you can't see. God said to these men, He said, "Can anyone hide himself in secret places so that I will not be able to see him? Do not I fill heaven and earth, saith the Lord. What a fascinating thing he said. Do not I fill heaven and earth. Another prophet said, the heaven and the heavens of heavens cannot contain you. Oh, Solomon, I believe. Much less this house that I have built with human hands. Nothing. I mean, the universe cannot contain God. Why should we assume that a house we would build would contain? He says, I fill the heavens and the earth. Now, it is in this sense that you can begin to understand how that God is everywhere. In a sense that no place can contain him. That he can be anywhere. That he can be everywhere. And yet, we are still left with this presentation of God as being present in a place. And the peculiar thing about this place where God is, it is where you are. You can't hide from him. Jonah couldn't flee from him. He tried. He did his best. He got in a ship to go to another country. He had them throw him over the side of the ship to commit suicide, perhaps, but he couldn't die. He finally had to face the fact that he could do absolutely nothing except what God commissioned him to do. Now I want you to turn back to a beautiful psalm, powerful psalm, and one with a great deal of meaning for all of us, but I think maybe we don't fully grasp all that is here. The 139th Psalm. The 139th Psalm, beginning in verse 1. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. Now this is true of every human being who has ever lived, whether he himself knows God or not. You might think, for example, that since you've never been baptized or you've never gone into the waters of baptism, that you're not a member of the church, that God does not concern himself with you. But the message of this psalm is going to be quite explicit as we go along, that from the day you are born, God knows you. He said, you have searched me and known me, and that is true of every man, woman, and child who has ever lived on the face of this earth. Converted or unconverted, no matter what their state or their relationship with God, they are known by him. You know my down sitting and my uprising. You understand my thought afar off. Now, I would say that at this moment of time, God will know the number of every human being in the world that is sitting down and the number that is standing up and the number that are lying down. You could run it as a statistic. If an angel were to walk up to him and ask him the question, it would be trivial, but it would be known. Because he says he knows the number of the hairs on your head, which is slightly less now than it was yesterday. And that difference has been noted. Not a hair falls from your head that is noted. Not a sparrow falls to the ground, but what it is known is a staggering concept, but it's presented to us as simple truth. And when you begin to understand the nature of the being with whom we have to do, it is not a staggering truth, really. It is what one might expect. But you see, the problem is, so much of the time, when we start thinking about God knowing everything about everybody, we think in terms of it collectively. We have the God is everywhere feeling. God is in the trees, and God is in the wind, and God is in the flowers, and God is in all of these things, and God is in all men, and God knows all men and knows what all men are doing. But that's not the way the Bible presents God to us. God presents himself to each human being as being specifically concerned about you. Not just about everybody, but specifically concerned about you. That's a little different from God being every place. He says you cannot flee from God. He says you cannot hide from God. There is your down sitting and your standing up is known of God. That God in heaven right now knows your posture. Yours. Not just everybody's, but yours. You compass my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my habits. Oh dear. Oh dear. There is not a single habit that you have that God is not acquainted with it. He is fully aware of the time you normally get up in the morning. He is fully aware of how many cups of coffee it takes to get you jump-started so you can get to work. He is fully aware of the route you take when you drive to work. He's quite aware of the time you normally go to bed at night. He's aware of the television programs you choose to watch, the movies you choose to go to. He knows who all your friends are, knows the kind of language you use in private conversation. He's fully aware of every word that you speak and every move that you make. Not just everybody. Let's don't worry about everybody. Let's consider the fact that God's attention and his place is where you are and is focused on you, because that is the way in which he presents himself in the Bible to us. There is not a word in my tongue, O Lord, but that you know it altogether. Well, as far as God's concerned, he sees and he knows everything. You have possessed my reins. You have covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are all your works, and that my soul knows right well. My substance was not hid from you when I was made in secret. Here's an embryo, not even a fetus yet. And he says, my substance, who I am, what I was going to become, all of this was known to you right from the beginning while I was still in my mother's womb. Staggering to consider. Now, he is presenting this to us not as though this is the only place in the world that God was and the only person with which he was concerned, but you see, as far as David was concerned, that was the only thing he had to concern himself with, was that God knew him from the moment of conception and through all the time of development in the womb. He said, your eyes did see my substance, being yet unperfect, and in your book all my members were written, which in continuance was fashioned when as yet there were none of them. Every finger, toe, and toenail, the nostrils, the eyes, and the color, these things were all noted in God's book, he said, when none of them even existed yet. Staggering to think of the incredibly intense scrutiny to which every one of us is placed by God. The things that may be developing in your body right now that you have no knowledge of and your doctor has not discovered yet are known by God. Already, way ahead of time. The things that are going on in your mind, which you have not even allowed yourself to think of or grasp yet yourself, are known and anticipated by God. How precious are your thoughts to me, God? How great is the sum of them? You know what is really interesting to me about this? There is not a hint in this psalm that the psalmist was even the least bit intimidated by this knowledge. Now, a lot of preachers will preach through this chapter of the Bible, and the objective of the sermon will be to intimidate you with the awareness of God's presence and the knowledge that he looks at every little thing you do so that maybe you'll straighten your life out and get your life right? Some of you probably heard sermons like that. God knows everything you do, so he's going to get you. But the psalmist was aware of one other thing, that the objective, the reason for God's scrutiny was not punishment or chastisement. It was love. He wanted to know, he wants to know, from the beginning, everything there is to know about you. Just like you. I mean, don't you ladies that you find yourself pregnant and the baby's on the way, how soon do you start speculating about whether it's male or female? I mean, when does it become a matter of real concern to you? Why, you could say, well, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to be a boy, it's going to be a girl. We'll just take what we get and wait 9 months and find out. But my people discuss, well, you can tell how it's carrying it. It's going to be high or it's low. It's going to be a boy or a girl. And there are probably all sorts of old wives' tales I haven't heard. Now they do ultrasound, and I even saw a picture the other day of an ultrasound, that had been done on a lady, and she had them there in a little screen. It was there. It looks sort of like what my boat does on the bottom of the lake with this graph recorder, when it's sounding the depth. But here it was, and there you could actually see, sure enough, the little telltale identification. This is going to be a boy. And it was fascinating to look at it. We want to know, don't we? God's interest is much the same, only at a level far greater than you and I perhaps can anticipate. Now, when you understand that and you realize it, perhaps it is just a little bit intimidating to know that, well, God, wouldn't you give me just a little bit of privacy somewhere along the line? The psalmist doesn't ask for it. He says, if I should count them, your thoughts, they are more in number than the sand, and when I awake, I am still with you. I go to bed at night, I sleep, I wake up in the morning, there you are, still with you. Surely you will slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, bloody men, for they speak against God wickedly, and your enemies take your name in vain. Do not I hate them, O Lord, that hate you, and have not I grieved with those that rise up against you? I hate them with a perfect hatred. I count them my enemies. And then he makes one of the most astonishing statements. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me, and know my thoughts. And see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Not the least intimidated. He does not ask for privacy. He doesn't say, oh Lord, screen me from your eyes for just a moment. Let me have some moment to myself. He says, God, search me. He said, already you have searched me, but he says, search me further. Know my heart. Know what there is to know about me. And you know, when you think about it, and you realize that the person who is knowing you is consumed with love of you, why would you fear being known? Why would you fear what they would do to you? Wouldn't you want it known if there were someone who had the power to heal you? Would not you want them to know in detail everything that was wrong with you that might be healed or might need to be healed? You'd want God to know about that small little developing black spot, on your liver. God want to know for sure about that little tumor that's just beginning to grow the doctor has not discovered. You'd want him to see it. You'd want him to do an examination. You'd want him to excise it or to heal you of it. You want his attention in that kind of a situation. Where is God? Turn back to Acts, if you would. Paul, in chapter 17, finds himself in Athens. He goes to a place, I went there myself on one occasion, up to Mars Hill, to the location where Paul went, and gave this particular sermon, sat there and read it. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, you men of Athens, this is chapter 17, verse 22, I perceive that in all things you are most religious. For as I passed by and I beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Whom therefore you ignorantly worship, him I declare unto you. Now, if you're going to declare God, if you're going to explain about God to people, you're going to want to talk about what he does and what he has done and why he exists, and of some interest to people might be also where he is. He says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands. You cannot build a house that he's going to live in. Neither is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed something, seeing he gives to all life and breath and all things. And he has made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined before the bounds of their habitation, that they might seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, as though he be not far from every one of us. Interesting expression. He presents the image of a man in the dark, sort of groping, putting out his hands. And he says, that's really about all you need to find God, is to grope, is just to feel for him. He says, because he's not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. In him. He presents it almost as though from the day we enter this world, we are inside of, within God. That you do not have to reach far for him. In one sense of the word, when you say God is everywhere, what you really, in a sense, admit is that you are in God. And this is what Paul, in a sense, presents to these men, that you are in him. That all you have to do is reach out and feel, and he is there. Now, this is, I think, interesting. Turn back to John, the 17th chapter, to the words of Jesus in this regard. John chapter 17, in his last prayer. John 17, verse 1. Verse 20. Jesus said, neither pray I for these alone, but for them also that shall believe on me through their word. That they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, that they also may be one in us. Now here, we're not just dealing with everybody that's in the world. We're dealing with the disciples of Jesus and with all of those who are going to believe on God through their preaching and their word. They're going to be part and parcel with this. He said, now I want all of you to understand. He's praying to God. He says, I want them to be one with us, to be united with us. He goes on to say, the glory which you gave me, I have given them, that they may be one even as we are one. I in them, and you in me, that they may be made perfect in one, that the world may know that you have sent me, and have loved them as you loved me. Jesus Christ is in you, and the Father is in Jesus Christ. Now, children, where does that make God? Where does that put him? It puts him in you. Now, when you decide to flee from God, and you get up and you go running down the street, where's God? Well, you're carrying him with you. He's still with you because he is in you. You go into a dark closet and you close the doors, you turn out the lights and you hide there. Where's God? He's right there in the closet with you. But you took him there. He went in there when you went in there. There's no way you can flee from God. It's like trying to get away from your own legs. How can you run from yourself? How can you hide from yourself? Because God says you and I are going to be one. This is the object of what God is trying to do. Turn back a few pages to the 15th chapter of John. Verse 1. I am the true vine, my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that bears not fruit, he takes away. Every branch that bears fruit, he purges it, and may bring forth more fruit. There is a sense in which a man can finally be away from God. Trust me, you don't ever want to be away from God. For when you are away from God, it's all over for you. There is that sense. He then says, but you are clean through the word that I have spoken in you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can you except you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. The same that stays in me, and I stay in him, the same brings forth much fruit. Then there are Paul's words in Galatians 2, verse 20. I am crucified with Christ, yet I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God who loved me and who gave himself for me. Now, how is it possible, someone might ask, though, that God can be with you over there and with me over here at the same time? How can we have this incredible personal contact? What difference does it make to you? It is possible, and God does it. And you are not asked in God's Word or in your life to try to figure out what God is doing over here or what God is doing with this person back here. All God says you need to concern yourself is that God is, that he is with you, that he knows you, and that the place where God is where you are for all your purposes. You do not have to go anywhere. You don't have to take a plane. You don't have to make a hike or a walk or a run or anything of the sort. God is where you are. He is there, he sees, and he knows. And that is all you need to know, as a matter of fact. We know, of course, how it is that we human beings are with one another. We know how that's possible. You know, Larry and I take every year, we go up to the Buffalo River and we're with each other for 3 days as we go down the river. And we can't be anywhere else. You know, we're there. We're with each other. And we kind of have to live with each other for 3 days. And I learned what Kitty has to put up with all year long, you know, during that 3-day period of time. You know, you could easily say, you know, when you read a scripture in the Bible where it talks about wives be subject to your husbands and so forth and so on. I could see a wife saying, boy, you know, God could say that to me, but he doesn't have to live with my husband. But you know he does. He really does. He has to live with your husband. He has to live with your husband a lot closer than you do. For God lives in your husband and in you. And every wrong thought, every hateful attitude, every filthy concept, every dirty word, every bit of hatred that exists in your body has to slam right up against the presence of God and his patience and his love and his compassion. You ever wonder why it is that some of us, even when we find ourselves in the church, find ourselves in such a state of, shall we say, tension or conflict or struggle? The answer is very simple. It's because you accepted Jesus Christ. And he said, I will come in and make my abode with you. And he is there. And he endures, even though many of the things that you and I do grieve him, far more than we could ever grieve one another. He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. What is that worth to you when you really think about it? Now, I ask the question, you know, if you decide to drop out of the church, will God lose track of you? If you decide to give up on his way of life, will he give up on you? If you decide to stop talking to God, will He stop talking to you? Of course not. Maybe that explains some of the disquiet that you know exists from time to time in your own mind, is that God has not stopped talking to you, even though you've stopped talking to Him. Take another look sometime when you get home and you have a little time at the 139th Psalm, one more time, to a man who becomes completely aware that God knows everything that he is doing. And even though he himself is as big a sinner that ever walked the face of the earth, he is comfortable knowing that God is there.